Fantastic. Love it. Right, let's dive straight in. What's the first tip you've got for us today?
The first tip is I'm going to focus on behaviour, which is, probably for the best. My first tip is about for new students and for new student teachers when they come to school. First thing is this: use the school behaviour policy. Now, that doesn't sound particularly ground shaking. It doesn't sound like it's going to set everyone's boats on fire. But it's amazing the number of people in schools who don't know what the behaviour policy is and don't use it. And then they kind of wonder, well, I wish I knew how to improve behaviour here. Because the first thing the school's going to do is say to you, did you use the school behaviour policy? Right? So the first thing to do is read the bloody thing. Now, they're not gripping. Right? I mean, I've read about 500. They're not gripping, I assure you. There's no shock, twist or surprise endings. But this is what the school is expecting you to do. Now, if everybody does it, then the impact of that is magnified. And while specific rules do matter, and there's loads of rules I don't agree with, if the school's got a rule on like no mobile phones, do it. I mean, if they say confiscate it, do it. And it makes huge impact because you take all that energy from everyone in the school and it drills down like a laser onto one spot and you can cut through steel. And incidentally, there's a kind of there's a follow-up tip from this. I hope you don't mind if I just sneak this in, Craig, which is that if you use the school behaviour policy, and again, it sounds so simple and so kind of obvious, then if the school comes to you and says, oh, the behaviour's not very good in your lessons, and you say, I'm using the school behaviour policy, then you're totally entitled to say to the school, what would you like me to do? And I'll tell you what, the answer is often, we're not really sure. We'd just like you to just be better. And that then exposes, if I may say so, difficulties and weaknesses and flaws in the school system that are not able to support you. Because if somebody comes up to you and says, we've noticed you've been setting a lot of school consequences or something like that, some kind of dreary Kafkaesque bureaucrat wants to try to drag your ass over the coals, right? You say, oh, really? That's interesting. So you're picking me up for using the school behaviour policy. What would you like me to do? And they probably won't know what to do because they couldn't manage a class themselves. So anyway, that's my first top tip.
I like it, Tom. Just a couple of follow-up questions to this, if that's okay. Yep. The first is, if you're a student teacher or any teacher and you read the behaviour policy and you think, I'm not so sure about this, it's a bit ropey, this one, would you still advise following it because its consistency is more important than kind of picking or choosing? So a bad behaviour policy followed by everybody is better than a kind of piecemeal approach?
Well, that's a really good point. I think that, if I may say so, I think it's so important to remember that when you're a teacher, you're a member of an institution. It's an institutional hierarchy. It's not a democracy. You're not a private tutor teaching the Queen of Sweden's children. You work in a bloody school. And if you start thinking, oh, I don't like that rule, I don't like it really much, then you're undermining the rest of the school. Because the problem is, what if somebody else doesn't like a rule that you like, right? But my point for teachers is this: I've never worked in a school where I liked every single one of the rules, but you've got to put your back into it. And the weird thing is that the net result is usually much more peace, calm, order and structure. Now, if the school rules are impossibly bad, like, for example, you got one of these schools that says, give children 15 warnings before you do anything, right? And, I've seen schools which are almost as bad as that. I've seen schools that use like 7 or 8 warnings before anything happens, right? Which is basically like saying to the kids, do as you please. Go. You've got 7 free goes. On you go. If it really is that bad, then still stick to the system, but try as much as possible with other members of staff to say to the leadership management, look, we're using the system, and this is the result. Because very often people who design these boneheaded systems are completely oblivious to the impact of the outcomes of these systems. They just like them. They just think they're nice, and they'll never have to deal with the consequences of the problem themselves. So make them aware of the consequences and try to kind of bring change from within. And if the school's really that bad, just leave. I say just leave. It's not that easy, but make that your long-term goal, because schools that don't know how to provide safe learning cultures for teachers don't deserve to have any. And that's my top tip.
And final
leave
question.
School. Quit.
I like it. Positive message. I like it.
You're welcome.
Final question on this tip, Tom.
Yep.
So obviously you've said there that kind of tweaking the behaviour policy is perhaps not a good idea, try and stick to it. What about kind of adding your own elements to it, in the sense that you're following everything with the school behaviour policy, but there are extra things you want to put in place within your classroom, whether it's just, an extra rule or an extra way that the kids respond. Is that something you'd advise? Is kind of adding okay, but kind of taking away from the policy not?
Absolutely. As long as what you want to do doesn't clash with the school behaviour policy, then you add what you like. And the beauty about this is that the school behaviour policy, it probably doesn't micromanage people. So, for example, you might have a school policy on, walking on the left-hand side of the corridor or the right-hand side of the corridor, but there won't be anything in the school behaviour policy for an art teacher about, where to store your masterpieces or how to distribute equipment at the beginning of the lesson. That's fine. You create your own rules and norms and routines about those types of things, as long as they cohere with the whole school systems.
Fantastic.